Hello, Hannah. I'm Sandeep here. So basically, I wanted to check whether you are able to hear me. Probably you can reply on question box. So you can type anything you want to ask, anything you want to say on question box. That's the usual place where we interact with people on webinar. Oh, thank you. You can hear me. So basically, I can obviously put you on speaker also. If I'll unmute you, we can talk. So net we have another 10 minutes to start this session. So we'll basically wait for others. Maybe meantime, if you can just let me know about your background, as in from which place you are, and I believe you must have cleared CFA level 1. That's why you are for this seminar.
हेलो हेलो संदीप
Hello.
हेलो
Yeah.
संदीप
Hello.
अच्छा हाँ संदीप बोलो
Yes, Sachin.
अच्छा मुझे आ रही है आपकी आवाज़
Okay, I think couple of people have also joined, so they have also confirmed. Thank you. Thanks for confirmation. So it's
ओके
fine, right?
या
Okay, thank you.
मेरे
Uh, Hello, good evening, Ravi. So basically, your question is whether there is a classroom training for level 2 conducted in Hyderabad. Ravi, we do have centers in Hyderabad, but I'm not sure whether Pristine is running a level 2 session. So what probably I can surely check, but maybe you can just drop a mail. And if you're based out of Hyderabad, in a sense that we have contacted you, there are reasonable chances that we will kind of reach to you when your batches are launched. In case if CFA level batch has to be launched, it will be in next 1 or 2 weeks, not more than that, right? Because we don't have a lot of time left. So we are launching this webinar batch from 3rd of February. For classroom batch, I'll probably come back to you. Maybe in meantime, you are also encouraged to probably drop a mail to Pristine. They will be able to confirm. So I'm using word they. Reason is obviously many faculty, including me, we are not part of Pristine as a full-time faculty, but we are basically freelancers working in industry, and teaching is more like an hobby. So in that sense, I'm using word they sometimes in Pristine, but when I say they, it's basically Pristine support and marketing team. I'll come back to you in any case. Yeah, you're welcome, Ravi. So, though we have some time left to start today's proceedings, just to utilize time, given that two of you have joined. So, Ravi and Hanna, I believe both of you are targeting June 2013. I mean, that's a fair enough assumption, right? And have you started your studies so far? Sorry, from which stage I went on mute? Can you hear me now? Oh, sorry, by mistake I pressed mute. So I think till this slide I was there. So basically slab bus weights is what we were discussing, and from there I must have been on mute. Okay, so I was basically telling you ethics in level 1 and level 2, what is the difference? Everything else remains same. Gibbs portions basically is replaced by soft dollar standards, some 4 or 5 case studies, as well as in prudent investor rule and those sort of concepts. So weightage wise within ethics, it will be another 10-15%, which will vary year on year. Second thing which I wanted to highlight is that in level 1 there were clear-cut percentage given to any section, because there were 240 questions and you can easily make out 3% roughly translates into 7-8 questions. But in level 2 there is a range they have given. So fixed income can be between 5 to 15, right? Economics can be between 5 to 10% of the all questions, because in 1 year, in certain years they have only 6 questions, in some years they had 12 questions, and that makes the entire level 2 again little tricky, right? So again have a look, as you will move further into CFA levels, you will realize that the peripheral areas will become even 0 in level 3, and the importance of core asset classes which are part of investment tools will become more and more. So equity will become very high in level 2, fixed income increasing by and large, derivatives increasing, alternative investment increasing, right? So total asset classes from 30, it almost become 55 and 40 in level 2, right? In level 3, obviously it is primarily about portfolio management planning, so that takes the maximum of the weightage, right? So that's the structure, the subject-wise changes between level 1 and level 2. This is little contradictory to what I earlier told. So I surely believe that in level 2 you have to be on the upper side of these efforts. Level 1 and level 3 you can probably still manage with 250 odd hours if you have a bit of finance background. Okay, so center and dates, I will not take your time because obviously you guys know these things, that level 2 and level 3 only happens in June every year, while level 1 happens both in June and December. Fee structure, I'm sure you have already seen it. I hope you guys know in level 2 you need not to pay the enrollment fee, it's only that extra fee which you have to pay. So effectively usually people pay $600-700 for level 2 and level 3. So reading material, I'm sure many of you might have used alternate materials. So though there is always CFA material, but probably more popular, at least in CFA level 1, is Kaplan Switzer material, which is pretty popular anywhere. Pristine offers you slides, but to be very frank, that is not a substitute for reading material, because that is more into notes format and it becomes very handy in last 1.5 months, 2 months, but it's not the everything which you are supposed to read. I personally will advise you strongly for going through CFA books. I understand these are lengthy and often for working professional it is not easy to go through those thick materials, but to whatever extent is possible you do. And why am I saying so? Because in CFA level 1 number of questions are so high that even if you are decently prepared but you have not gone very deep, you can still manage to clear it. In level 2 number of questions reduces, and let's say you know something 80% and it's just like on a bad day you didn't study something. In fact, there are many things. Switzer is popular because Switzer kind of reduces the thickness of volume. In the bargain, they obviously miss certain points which they believe is not important, which is a fair enough thing to do. The only challenge in CFA level 2 sometimes In fact, many a times they ask questions from those areas also. In that sense, it becomes very tricky, and it's like leaving yourself to the luck. And for that reason alone, I will again tell you, try to make CFA material as much as you can do as your core reading material. Let's say you find a particular section too lengthy in terms of CFA books, probably you can rely to Switzer or Stella notebooks, whatever is available with you. Right? Calculators will again be the same what you have used in CFA level 1. So no need to buy next set of calculators. Okay, so this slide I'll run through. This I will not waste your time. I'm sure you guys know. I mean, before going into CFA program, you obviously know what kind of jobs are on offer after doing CFA, those sort of things. So I will not take. So basically, I hope you have already seen a bit about Pristine. So Pristine is basically an institute run by ex-IIM guys. IIM is one of the most prestigious institutes in India, MBA institutes. So they were most of them were investment bankers, primarily working with institutes like UBS and Standard Chartered, and they are running this institute for probably 6th year now. Now this institute basically is run by set of full-time faculties as well as part-time freelancers. So I'm being one of those freelancer. The good part is every faculty and anybody who is teaching CFA has to be a CFA. I mean, this is something which there's no compromise. At the same time, in fact, each and every faculty is already working in industry or at least have worked in financial industry. So the faculty will have both this dual combo of having completed CFA and FRM or CFA, CFA or FRM or CFA and FRM. At the same time, most of us are working in fact, every one of us are working in industry. So I for myself is working with an investment bank in collateral management department. I've completed my CFA and FRM, and I'm just sharing this information for illustration purpose. So that's the focus we have, because we believe that finance is not a textbook kind of a course. Unless faculties have a background, industry background, they will not be able to explain the nuances of the discussion which generally happens in CFA books. Okay, and then obviously we are authorized to basically coach you for all these courses. We do a lot of corporate training, so it's not only CFA and FRM is what we coach you for. There are many corporate level programs which we run primarily in the area of equity valuation and risk management. And then we do take pilot courses of 7 days, basically in the area of financial modeling, with a lot of premier institutes of India. But these are more like not running programs. I mean, every year we do it with some institutes, but it's not like every year we will do. Though last year we have launched a full-fledged program with in a joint venture with IIM Indore. As of now, we are present in multiple cities of India. At some stage, we had a center in Singapore. We tried a few things in UK market and Gulf market, but it's fair to assume that probably for this season, we are in different cities of India, along with obviously our online presence in the form of webinars. Fee and all these things I'll not touch in this session. Probably I will encourage you to have a mail conversation or a phonic conversation with Pristine marketing and support team. Though you are encouraged to have a look in terms of what these online programs will cover if you let's say you enroll for CFA level 2. So basically content, crash course, training, mock papers and question bank. So all these question banks, these slides, these presentations, and then we have revision classes. Everything is obviously available. So if see, these sessions are obviously live, but every session is getting recorded also. So let's say you missed some part of it or completely it, you can always log in and download it, or even simply watch it instead of downloading. Whatever pleases you, you can do that. So these recordings are available on Pristine website which you get a student login and you can avail once you have enrolled for a program. Obviously, that website will have uh, an online question bank, reasonably large enough questions. Plus, it also has a forum where you post your doubts, and within a ETA of turnaround time of TAT of 24 hours to 40 hours max, one of us from faculty will reply you to that question on that forum itself. Usually we encourage people to ask these doubts in those forums, because then other students can also see what is the discussion going on and probably can get benefited from those question answers. So for doubt clearing, we have an interactive forum which is extensively used by students. Okay, so about results and centers, I will probably not go through much of details on these slides. Any questions so far, friends? Then there are some scholarships details also, which you can probably again check with Pristine. Okay, so this is what I was talking about, online platform for enhanced learning experience. So course materials are uploaded on website, chapter-wise quizzes, forums for doubt clearing, news forums, and then obviously we have this extensive feedback mechanism. After every session, we have uh, a poll where you basically rate faculties on various parameters, and that goes as a structured feedback from you to Pristine, and they adjust faculties basis that. Okay, so again, I mean, how does our typical online questions look like? Obviously, when you select answers, you get detailed explanation on why something was correct and something wasn't. Okay, for registration process, probably again you need to contact New Knowledge Management, which is the parent firm for Pristine. Okay, so I'm done with the introduction part in terms of Pristine and CFA Level 2 offering. To be very frank, I've rushed through the slides because I knew most of these informations you know one way or other. I mean, usually people have a lot of questions when they try to enroll for CFA Level 2. I mean, even questions like, I mean, do I really need to do CFA? What kind of job prospects are there? What is the recognition of this course in market? Usually such questions are not in the mind of CFA Level 2 because they have already gone through such things. That doesn't mean I'm not in a mood to answer those kind of questions. If any one of you want to cover any of those things, I'm here to do that. Okay, friends. So can you confirm whether I mean any questions? Manu Balachandar. So Manu Balchandar, we can basically interact via question box. So if you have anything, you can type in question box. Ravi, Hanna. Okay friends, so let's move on to corporate finance. Again, this session on corporate finance is more for illustration about how a typical webinar looks like. Okay. So can you guys confirm whether we're good to go? I'm not seeing response from some time, and that makes me nervous because usually the biggest challenge with webinars is to how to ensure that communication is being proper in terms of what I'm trying to tell is getting transferred. Okay, thanks for confirmation, Hannah. So corporate finance. In corporate finance, basically we have two sessions, corporate finance 1 and 2. In one, we basically cover three things, that is capital budgeting, capital structure, and then dividends and share repurchases. While we will go through some of these slides, we will try to cover, let's say, a chapter. You will realize that a lot of these things you have already read in CFA level 1. So again, that feeling will be consistent throughout level 2. Out of, let's say, entire 100% syllabus, only 30-40% will be a new topic per se. 60% will be basically extension of something which you have already read in level 1, but it's just like probably going deeper and more calculations. So basically, just to do some refresher, IRR and NPV, these were the two basic methods you have studied in level 1. I hope you still remember that when in conflict between NPV and IRR, we select NPV. Can anyone tell me why we select NPV method, not IRR? What were the fundamental reasons to do so? So there were some thumb rule. You will select a project if NPV is positive. You will select a project if IRR is greater than the cost of capital, and that cost of capital is nothing but weighted average cost of capital. Your capital can have multiple components like debt, equity, or preferred debt, preferred equity, right? So basically we usually use a word called WACC, which is weighted average cost of capital. So thumb rule is, if you select, you can select a project if it has a positive NPV. You can select a project if IRR is greater than cost of capital. What if there are two set of projects where there are two projects which you have to decide as in which project to take, but you're getting conflicting signals from NPV, right? So NPV tells that choose project 1 over 2 because it has bigger NPV, while IRR tells you probably go for bigger IRR kind of a thing, or something having a less IRR than WACC. So I'm sure you still remember, when in conflict you always select NPV. My question to the group was, why do we do so? Do you guys remember some of the discussions we had in level 1? Okay, hopefully you remember that IRR calculation per se cannot be done via a paper pencil. You can calculate NPV without help of financial calculator, but you cannot calculate IRR without financial calculator. Reason was, NPV is basically a numerator kind of a discussion. So you basically discount your cash flows and you add it and you basically subtract your one-time initial cash outflow, or in some unique cases even multiple cash outflows, and you basically try to realize whether it is net present value is a positive number or a negative number. On the other hand, IRR is basically an effort, or is basically that discount rate which makes all your NPV of cash flow is equal to 0. So IRR effectively is that that discount rate which applied to different cash flows will make your NPV 0. Now because this is in a denominator and it goes into multiple power, so a third year cash flow will be discounted at 1 plus IRR by 100 raised to the power 3. effectively by algebra, certain algebraic equations, which is, let's say, quadratic equations, can have three solutions, right? And out of those three, probably two can be imaginary solutions and one can be something else, or sometimes there can be two real solutions also. So there are technically cash flows possible where you get, let's say, two IRRs. One is 37% and another is 13%. And also there are cash flows where you don't get any solutions. Every solution is an imaginary solution. There is no, when I say imaginary, I hope you remember from your basic maths, it's basically 6 plus 4i kind of a solution, right? So technically there are cash flows possible, especially in those cases where there are multiple cash outflows. I mean, initially you invest something, you get something for 3 years, and then again you have to invest something. In those kind of cases, IRR doesn't do a good justice, and that is why we always try to rely on NPV. Another major thing I want to highlight at IRR level is IRR also has a fundamental assumption problem that IRR, so when we say IRR of a project is, let's say, 17%, right? To realize that number, you should be in a position to reinvest the cash flows which you will get before the project terminates. Let's say it's a 10-year project, so whatever money you are getting in second year, third year, seventh year, and eighth year, or in whatever year, unless you are able to reinvest this rate at the overall IRR rate, this realization of 17% IRR for an entire project is not possible, and that is a big enough assumption and often not feasible in real world, and that is why again IRR is not considered to be as strong a decision tool as probably NPV is, right? So I mean, again, these are the things which I'm sure you have already gone through in level 1. Again, similar kind of things are tested in level 2. Obviously, expectations is to have even deeper understanding, right? So so capital budgeting is basically a process of where companies decide where to take certain capital projects, and these projects can be for multiple reasons. So typically, why do companies need to go for certain projects? It can be replacement projects where basically you are starting a new product. You are basically replacing the old machines with new set of machines, right? Replacement projects can be for cost reduction also. There can be expansion project where you are increasing your plant capacity. It can be new product at all. It can be mandatory projects. What do you mean mandatory projects? So basically all those projects which are kind of imposed on companies via regulators or governments, primarily in the field of environment, safety, quality, right? So those kind of projects are considered to be mandatory projects. In those cases, typically your decision is not to whether to do it or not. Probably you will surely do it. The only thing is you want to realize the cost of doing it in terms of, let's say, it's a negative NPV project, because most of these mandatory projects will not have any benefit. It will only have investments, right? And then other projects is basically an etc. category. So especially you will realize in agency cost problem, management might still do something which may not be necessarily be a very good thing for company. So it might be a pet project of a CEO. He wants to increase the size of his firm. So anything which is not anything whose rationale is not probably defined by any of these above categories will probably classify it as other projects, right? So there are some fundamental things to remember when we do capital budgeting. One, we never talk about accounting income. So every time we are discussing, you will realize that we are talking about cash flows. We are not talking about accounting income. Second is cash flow is about incremental cash flow. What is that? What does that mean? Probably you will realize when we will discuss sunk cost. So basically it's what is that additional a company will get. So let's say I'm already having a run rate of $10 million revenue every quarter. If I'm taking that project, my revenue goes to 12 million. Now that 12 million is not my cash flow. It is only that extra cash flow, which is basically a $2 million every quarter. That is what we are interested while doing this analysis of whether to take a particular project or not. So again, focus is on the marginal increase or or delta or incremental, pretty much same words for the same concept, right? So it's capital wasting is about incremental cash flows. Then there are important concepts like opportunity cost. So what is opportunity cost? It's basically when we do something, we tend to compare it with zero, as in not doing something. But what we often miss, if we don't do X, we obviously will do Y. Not doing X doesn't mean we will not do anything else. To put it in probably in an example kind of a case, let's say you are starting a company. Your thinking will always be whether to start this company or not do something. While your decision making ideally should be, if you will not do this business, obviously you will do something else, where again there is some profitable opportunities which you are leaving to probably jump into this business. So again, focus is on that incremental extra thing, and that's why opportunity cost of any input, be it your entrepreneurial capacity, be it your equity also. So I'm sure in level 1 in economics you have discussed concepts like economic income, where basically we talked about even cost of equity, because in accounting income we never talk about cost of equity. I mean, we obviously pay dividends, but we as such don't account for any cost of that equity. But while doing capital wasting, we can do that if we were sure that we will use the land and equity for some other purpose. So that approach is basically opportunity cost of those factors. Another important and interesting concept is sunk cost. So whenever we do capital wasting, and it's very typical for any company to hire set of consultants, advisors to whether to take that project. So let's say you have already paid 0.1 million to a set of consultant for a greenfield or a brownfield project, right? Now your decision is whether to take that project or not. Your tendency will be to probably include that 0.1 million as a cost, but a smart person will recognize now going forward, if you take that project or if you don't take that project, in both cases you have to pay that 0.1 million. In that sense, that should not be part of your decision making. So that cost can be considered as a sunk cost, though technically it's not a sunk cost because it obviously did its purpose, and that is why you have that proposal. It's only sunk cost in the context that going forward, whatever cost analysis you are doing, that money should not be part of it, because that decision is not in your hand. I mean, that is already done and dusted, right? So in that sense, that is a sunk cost. Then there is a concept of externalities, which is basically when you take a project, there can be certain collateral impacts of that decision, and most popular is probably cannibalization, which you can actually call as negative externality. Cannibalization is basically, let's say iPhone comes up with basically our iPad mini has come, right? So a lot of sales might have happened, but I'm sure Apple is smart enough to realize that when they launched mini, obviously it might have eaten into some sales of iPad. So whenever you are launching a product, you should realize whether by launching that product there is some sales of your existing product which is being eaten up. If that is the case, then you will call it negative externality or cannibalization. Can anyone give me an example of positive externality? I mean, real life case of positive externality. Any quick examples? Okay, so I mean, maybe cannibalization itself, we can turn it around. Many times we see when you launch a very high quality product, let's say a new smartphone, while in and you as a company has basically your company has never launched a smartphone before. So because you have launched a smartphone, suddenly customers start feeling very good about your phone, and suddenly your uh, other kind of phones are being sold even more. So that's a positive impact of a new product. So I mean, that's like reverse cannibalization, right? So again, I mean, these current kind of externality is something whatever. I mean, see, most of these will be very subjective assessments. So assessments, to be very frank, but we try to capture as much as we can while clearly highlighting the assumptions we are making in the process, right? And again, whenever we do the discounting, obviously structurally we are focusing on time value of money instead of simply adding and subtracting cash flows. Every cash flow is a post-tax cash flow, and we do not take care of financing cost and project risk, because that is the